I think that many of the names that we read in the Coronado expedition documents are local place names, names of the local natives who were trying to convey how they perceived their landscape. I think what happened is some of these names got transferred, morphed into the Nahuatl language, because there were a number of Central and West Mexican natives and Europeans who spoke Nahuatl or Nahuatl. I think a good example of this is the term Chichilticale. Chichilticale does mean red house, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's been associated with a place that has a prehistoric salado in ruin in scholars' minds. This is what Castaneda says about it. But Jaramillo describes it as a cordillera, mountain range, and a pass. Melchor Diaz, when he is referring to it, is more like an area. He is in a Sobaipuri O'odham village and writes a letter and sends it back south. And in it, he says that he's in a pueblo writing this. And he's talking about Chichilticale as this broader thing. So as some scholars have said, a province, a district, whatever. It's an area for the Spaniards. So the Spaniards have it as a red house, a district or area, a pass, and a mountain range. But I think it began as a Chiricahua Apache word, an ancestral Chiricahua Apache word that referred to a more generalized place, probably the mountains, a canyon within the mountain, or a pass, probably a general area, probably a canyon area, and a pass. And I think one of the reasons this has not been understood before is because scholars have assumed that many of the natives that we now know were in the area were not there yet. For example, my research has shown that the Chiricahua Apache, the Jocome, and the Sobaipuri were all present in the southern Southwest, in Arizona, no later than AD 1300, meaning around 1280. So they were there when Coronado came. Many scholars believed that all of these groups were not present until about the 1600s or 1700s. We now know that not to be true. So we've got the presence of all three of these groups long before Coronado arrived. So when we discuss the Coronado expedition documents and the meaning of some of the terms, then we need to take into account the local groups that were present and see if it's their terms that they used to describe their landscape. One of the reasons this is important is because it can help, this information, if properly interpreted, can help us determine where the route went and also help us understand what the Europeans were seeing when they passed through the area and when they camped in certain places, and how the local natives at the time saw the place. So I'm thinking that what happened in the case of Chichilticale, which is a place name, I think it started out as a local term used by the ancestral Chiricahua Apache, and it morphed into a Nahuatl or Nahuatl term. The Nahuatl term is red house. It means, Chichilticale means red house. The Apache term means oak water flows out, or oak spring. And I think this is important to understand because it places us closer to what the Europeans were trying to convey in their documents. Now, Chichilticale means several different things to different people. The first references to it refer to an area. So Melchor Diaz, in the winter of 1539, 1540, was on the San Pedro in or near a native settlement. And he said, in this pueblo, and he was in that area, and he was referring to being in the Chichilticale area. Shortly after that, when the advance guard of the Coronado expedition went through, Jaramillo was with Coronado, and years later he wrote that they went to the right to the base of the cordillera, where they were told it was Chichilticale. So at that time, the mountain range, a canyon, a pass, some aspect of that, probably a canyon and a pass area, was considered Chichilticale by the ancestral Chiricahua Apache. One of the things that seems clear is there is an Apache word that means oak or acorn that's very similar to this. This was first suggested, this notion of that perhaps it was an Athabascan, Apachean, or Navajo language, was first suggested by Albert Schroeder years ago. He suggested some words that might be, but they don't sound like Chichilticale at all. So I asked a linguist to the Apache, an expert, what word might sound similar. And he came up with a hypothesis that I think is very likely, because otherwise, how would they have named it? They tell us that they were told it was called this. And so, of course, they're going to be told it was called Chichilticale in their language. And it transformed, the word changed into something that was familiar within a language that the Europeans and their native retainers and so on, the native warriors and auxiliaries, understood. And I think this explains the name. Some of the clues, I think, are in the name, but I want to double check some things with you. I want to talk about the potential origin of the name, because I've thought for some time now that rather than originally being a Nahuatl term, like everyone thinks, red house, I think it might actually be an Apache word.
Chichilticale, 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 something like that. And that means, yeah, a place with oaks where the water flows out, something like that. Yeah, so actually it's not terribly hard to reinterpret Chichilticale as an Apache word meaning oak springs. Chichilticale, this literally means oak's water flows out, and sounds like a well-formed place name. It is also useful to know that the H in Jali, it's not always very velar, but it can be very, very velar. It sounds a little bit like a Castilian Spanish, jota, easily confused with a K. Yeah, this could be a misinterpretation of an Apache, a perfectly well-formed Apache place name. And if those people think that everyone who is native speaks Nahuatl, or if they have Nahuatl speakers with them, they might misinterpret it that way.
What dialect were you telling me this in? Was this Chiricahua dialect?
No, I don't know how to say this in Chiricahua. It might be identical. This is Western Apache. Okay, Chichilticale, Chichilticale, Chichilticale would be like a faster pronunciation. Chichilticale, something like that.
I'm impressed with how that sounds so much like Chichilticale.
Well, yeah, it does. It does. But I know for me, it's just a theory.
And the Spaniards, since they were associated with the Nahuatl speakers, meaning the Central and West Mexican natives, they would have asked them, what does this mean? Or they could have asked, what did they say this was? And the Nahuatl speaker says, oh, it's Chichilticale. It means, so how would you say Chichilticale or Red House in Nahuatl?
Nahuatl is Chichilticale, as opposed to Chichilticale, Chichilticale. Nahuatl, Chichilticale, 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 Chichilticale. But all these Apache, these typical Apache place names, they refer generally to an area, to a certain area. They don't refer to one specific spot, that generally speaking. Yeah.
So let's follow through on that. So what you're saying is they would refer to a whole, like the Dragoon Mountains, or would they refer to a canyon within the mountains? How did that work?
Well, that would probably have a word for the whole Dragoon Mountains. They would probably have a word for a canyon, but it would be more like the area of the canyon, not necessarily the canyon really narrowly defined. I mean, that's how they, they don't have. Yeah, that's what I was told by Vincent Randall, that don't think of those things as like precise spots, like defined to the yard or to the half mile or something like that. They're generally areas that are sort of defined by a particular feature.
So it's my inference that it was the ancestral Chiricahua Apache that they encountered, because we have early dates that predate Coronado from that very mountain range that Jaramillo was referencing. So I think the natives, the ancestral Apache, were referring to where the pass was and where they encountered the mountain range as Oak Spring or Oak water flows out. I think also that by the time Castaneda came through months and months later, the concept that was being conveyed transformed to Red House, because that's the Nahuatl term and it's very similar to the Apache term. So as it got passed down the line, kind of in a child's telephone game, it transformed from the Apache word and meaning to the Nahuatl meaning the Nahuatl word that meant Red House. And I think the reason this was able to happen in part is because adjacent to the trail, there is a Solotto ruin. In fact, there's a couple of them that occur at that point on the trail that allowed Castaneda and who knows who else within that second group to assume that that's what it referenced. But Castaneda was referring to a different thing, and it was not seemingly at the foot of the cordillera where this ruin was, even though that's the way it's been translated. So I think we're talking about different things within an area, and when Mildred Diaz, Juan Jaramillo, and Pedro de Castaneda were talking about it, they were referencing different things but within this area and making assumptions, and those transformed over time, and also the understanding of what the name meant changed over time as well, as it got passed down the line and as it became part of the lore of the expedition.